Много песен слыхал я в родной стране, в них про радость и горе мне пели, но одна из тех песен в память врезалась мне. Это песня рабочей артели.
I'm madly in love with him, and I hope that we will see each other soon. I love her so much. She's my beloved woman. All my thoughts about the future life were connected with her. I was planning to live together with her for the rest of my life. I feel bitterness, guilt, horror, for I cannot help my loved one, and it is me who's to blame for all of this. On the one hand, the story is simple. On the other, given the historical moment, it is certainly amazing. 3 Ukrainians, 3 young men, go to Moscow as construction workers. But this is not surprising, even given the real war going on between Ukraine and Russia. Some men are on the front line, while others are going to the aggressor country for work. I understand that they need to make money to support families. There is no Iron Curtain, and there is no visa regime either. In this sense, the story is simple. Not really surprising either is the fact that the 3 migrant workers from our story in recent past bravely defended the independence of their homeland in battles against the aggressor and then went to Russia for work. But the story starts to resemble a spy thriller when we learn that these 3 war veterans, under the cover of seasoned guest laborers, were to play the roles of terrorists in Moscow and other Russian cities.
Изображать не ремонтников, строителей, а диверсантов-террористов. Это что?
Was this story concocted by the SBU, Ukraine Security Service, which decided to pay back the Russian Secret Service in kind? Did such an amazing expedition really take place? And was it organized, according to the investigators, by the couple whose touching love confession we saw in the initial scene of the film?
Признавались друг другу в любви.
She's in prison now in Ukraine, and he is free in Russia. A peculiar story, isn't it? We detained Daria Mastikasheva and Alexander Karatai. Mastikasheva, as far as I know, is the common-law wife of Mr. Sokolov, an expert with Moscow-based Federal Information Center Analysis and Security. It is at his request that Mastikasheva, together with Karatai, handpicked 3 war veterans with combat experience in Ukraine, lured them to Moscow in July 2017, promising them a solid fee for construction work. Every step of the operation was well planned. According to plan, they were to leave as many traces as possible to indicate they were preparing explosions in crowded public places, railway stations, airports. At an SBU briefing, these failed would-be terrorists, who are now witnesses for the state, were introduced to journalists как свидетели. These are Yuri Bondar, Sergei Morozov, Stanislav Yurkevich, residents of the Dnipro region. Did they understand what they were doing, or were they manipulated? Well, at least at the beginning they did not understand, but at the end of the day, the guys started to guess, and that's why after a day spent at a rented apartment in Moscow, they quietly took off. The 3 members of the expedition, whose names were mentioned at the briefing, realized at the end of the first day in Moscow that they were being manipulated, and they urgently returned to Ukraine and testified against Mastikasheva and Karatai. Both Mastikasheva and Karatai now denounce their initial confessions and plead not guilty. Mastikasheva complains she was made to confess under torture.
Были выбиты из нее под пытками.
When they opened my car, they forced me on the ground, handcuffed me and put me back into the car. They put a bag on my head and a balaclava on top so that I couldn't see anything. At 7 p.m. I was brought to a strange place and locked in the basement of an abandoned building. An hour later, 2 more men came in. They tied up my hands, put me against the wall and started beating me real hard on my head, body, legs. Eventually, Daria gave in and read out the confession imposed on her. She said, Mastikasheva thus confessed that she and her friend Alexander Karatai, following the orders of the Russian citizen Sergei Sokolov, hired, equipped with work clothes, tools and also with special instructions 3 war veterans who took off to Russia, where within a week they were to travel from Moscow to the cities of Kurchatov and Tolyatti as guest laborers.
Как сезонные строители-зарабитчане.
The head of the group, the foreman, was to take videos of various facilities, such as, for example, Domodedovo Airport, Moscow subway station Komsomolskaya and Leningradsky railway station. The foreman had also to call a phone number in Ukraine several times a day at the fixed time and read, as instructed, his part of the dialogue to make it perfectly clear that the 3 men were preparing terrorist attacks in Russia. Alexander Karatai denies his guilt and claims that unlawful methods, same as in Mastikasheva's case, were applied to him. I wanted to say that I was illegally detained and accused of high treason, as if I betrayed my motherland and so on, but in fact, I didn't do it. Some people attacked me in the car. They put a plastic bag on my head and took me to an unknown place, where for a whole day they tortured me, beat me up and choked me to the point of losing consciousness, pressing me to admit what I didn't do. Both Karatai and Mastikasheva say that in their cars and apartments investigators found hand grenades during searches. He swears he has nothing to do with the finds, and if he has known Mastikasheva since childhood, they grew up in the same village, he knows Sokolov only as her common-law husband. He has no business in common with Sokolov, and what's more, he never organized any provocation trip to Moscow, a crime he is being accused of, he says. You didn't send them to Russia, did you? No, I didn't send them to Russia. Are you in any way connected with construction business in Russia? No, I'm not. Firstly, this is a horrible, absolutely cynical violation of human rights. A woman is abducted, subjected to torture and violence. They forced her to read the text of a confession, and they video recorded it. This video was presented to the public, and Mastikasheva was declared guilty.
И назначили Дашу виновной уже.
The lawyer believes that the special services of Ukraine, in such a brutal way, are taking revenge on Mastikasheva's common-law husband, Russian citizen Sergei Sokolov, the former head of Atoll Company, which in the past was officially in charge of information security of once influential and now deceased Russian oligarch Boris Berezovsky. When in mid-2000s, for a number of reasons, Berezovsky ceased to use Sokolov's services, the latter devoted himself to political investigations as an expert of the analysis and security think tank. Rybin believes that it was Sokolov's latest investigations, which he insists exposed alleged criminal connection of Ukrainian special services with organized crime that evoked SBU's wrath. If anyone has any complaints about Sergei Sokolov, they can voice them with him. I do not see any problem here, to be honest. He's always in touch. You can contact him at any time of the day, so it beats me how I fit into all this. I'm very grateful to him. I'm insanely in love with him, and I hope that we will soon be together again. If Sokolov really used Mastikasheva as an agent, then how does that fit their love story? Could he really, even if he is a spy, so cynically put his loved one's life at risk in his spy games?
Так цинично рисковать жизнью возлюбленной.
As Mastikasheva said, Sokolov happened to be quite reachable, and with surprising ease agreed to an interview at his rented apartment in Moscow.
Даша моя жена, мы живем вместе.
Dasha is my wife. We live together. I love her very much. She is my beloved woman. I was planning to live with her for the rest of my life.
Прожить остаток своей жизни вместе.
Sokolov says that in 2013 he came to Dnipro to set up a branch of a sports organization Golden League. Running into Mastikasheva by chance, he hired her to work in his company, and as he says, he fell in love with this woman, 34 years younger than himself. He eagerly tells the story of how their relationship developed, how she came to Moscow to visit him for the first time. And I was amazed when I asked her, Dasha, how about a visit to a disco club? Where do you want to go? We can go to some boutique store, we can go to a nightclub, we can go to a good restaurant. She says, to Red Square. She wanted to go to the mausoleum. She was so excited. When we came to Red Square, she went, "What's this? What's this? What's this?" She was so excited about all these new things. On the day she was arrested, August 15, 2017, Mastikasheva was getting ready to go back to Moscow again, this time to prepare for her long-awaited wedding. I wanted to give her a kind of fairy tale. I wanted her to have a real wedding, a white dress with a veil. I wanted to formally ask for her hand in marriage, to put a ring on her finger. Not for show, mind you. I wanted her to experience this happiness. He gradually slides over to his past and tells remarkable stories how he made friends with the dons of the criminal world and worked for some members of the Russian power elite. For Sokolov, as well as for his boss, Berezovsky, the peak of coming into power fell on the Operation Successor, organized by the family, the Yeltsin family, a family not in the sense of kinship, but in the mafia sense. In other words, the Yeltsin clan, where Berezovsky by then secured a position of influence, becoming one of the authors of the multi-layered and cynical operation that ensured the transfer of power from the aging, sick and drinking Yeltsin to the young, healthy, energetic Putin who never smoked or drank. Sokolov modestly assesses his role in the installment of the successor in the Kremlin. He just ran a mopping-up errand in St. Petersburg, he says. I was sent there as a non-involved person. Where to? St. Petersburg. To clean up what? To clean up information leaks. Such things are generally done on the eve of any election. Who were you to clean up for? The future presidential candidate. Did you do your job well? History shown that I did. You yourself could have been mopped up too. Did you get a sense that it was a very risky affair? Yes, I did, but I was already built into the system. Sokolov has no doubt that there's a civil war in Ukraine. During the last 3 years, after the annexation of the Crimea and the beginning of the Russian armed aggression in the Donbass, Sokolov was noted for his investigations, the sensational conclusions of which were actively discussed on Russian television. Among the particularly high-profile cases, we would single out the investigation which asserts that the fugitive Russian legislator Denis Voronenkov, assassinated in Kiev last year, died at the hands of killers from Dnipropetrovsk organized crime gang, which acted in cooperation with Ukraine's security service, he says. In another investigation, Sokolov insisted that the Malaysian Boeing shutdown over Ukraine was blown up by an explosive device planted on the plane at Amsterdam airport by Western security services. The last investigation in the series was aimed to prove that Ukraine has special camps where they prepare terrorists for acts of terror in the Donbass and in Russia. The investigations in question, all later proven complete fakes, drew much attention from the Russian television audiences of the most rated primetime programs and shows. According to Sokolov, the evidence for the alleged crimes of Ukraine and the West was obtained by his agents in Ukraine. Sokolov asserts that his common-law wife was taken hostage to avenge him for his investigations. He categorically denies any involvement in the organization of the provocation expedition to Moscow. The participants in the operation themselves, however, do not hide the details of the operation, which could have cost them lives, and not only them. The conditions were these. They wanted us to be war veterans so that they could rely on us, that we will not deceive them.
На них можно рассчитывать, они не обманут.
Who said so? Well,
Это никто не говорит.
nobody did. We realized it ourselves, and it became clear after the conversation with Karatai.
С Сашей это было понятно.
He told us that in order to cross the border, we were to have our IDs of war veterans on us for Russian border guard checked, kind of.
Якобы по базе нас пробили для пересечения.
According to Bondar, Karatai asked him to recruit two more brothers in arms he could trust. He did so, and Stanislav Yurkevich and Sergei Morozov, both from Kamenskoye, thus joined the group. Karatai promised up to $1,000 to each of them for a week of work in Russia. They easily agreed and went to Moscow, but on the first day they understood they were being manipulated, they said. I had this gut feeling when we came to Moscow. Why? Because there was this instruction, according to which I was to take some videos. Where? At the metro station, at the railway station, and at the airport. What else did you have to do according to the instructions? To make phone calls? Tell me about it. When we were on the way to Moscow, just after we crossed the border, we had to send a message and call a Russian number and then a Ukrainian number.
Украинский номер отзвонится и на российский номер.
And what were you supposed to say? Well, that we crossed the border. You had lines written for you in the instruction? Yes, according to the instruction, for example, I was to make a call, say from 12 p.m. to 2 a.m. to say that we have crossed the border. When we came to Moscow, we also had to call and send a message asking, well, to be met. Who met you, Alexander? Of you three, who made these calls? I did. What did you say when you called the Ukrainian number? Did you just read the lines of the scenario?
По сценарию. По сценарию, да.
Yes, from the scenario. Okay, and who did you speak to, a man or a woman? To a man. Did he read his own lines back to you as was written in the scenario? Yes. Okay, how many times did you have these conversations? I don't remember for sure, but we fulfilled one-day program and then realized where it could lead us in the end, so we decided to beat it.
Кончится, и мы решили уходить.
Is Bondar being sincere? He had the instructions from the very beginning, and also the suspiciously large sum set for 1 week of work should have alerted him. And now the second participant and war veteran, Stas Yurkevich, will tell us how they came to Moscow, where Karatai met them and escorted them to the rental apartment.
В подмосковном городе Домодедово. Не путать с аэропортом.
So we were brought to a rented apartment somewhere near Domodedovo. Was it a luxury apartment? More like a luxury barn. Bondar filled in the papers with his passport details and wrote down my and Morozov's last names. The apartment was rented for 3 months. Who paid for it? Karatai did. It's probably about time to answer your questions about Mastikasheva's involvement, taking into account that, according to the available witnesses' testimony, Karatai took the lead in managing almost all the issues of the expedition, and she's not even mentioned, it seems. It was Karatai who gave Bonder a new cell phone with just 3 numbers saved in its memory. At time periods specified by the instructions, Bonder was to send pre-prepared messages, call the 2 numbers, and read out the lines as guided. On the other side of the line, in a rental room in Kamenskoye, another male voice responded. The owner of this voice was Karatai's driver, Igor Mamon. Were you alone in this apartment? No, I was there with Dasha or not Dasha, I'm not sure. Daria? Yes, most probably Daria. A slim and black head? Yes, slim, black head and pretty. She was nice and polite. She handed me the phone, turned it on in my presence. What were you to say? Did you have lines written for you in advance, to be repeated? Yes. At first it was a printer, and then just a text in the Android program, in the phone. Who did you speak with? Well, with Bonder. Did you speak with him always at a specifically set time? Yes, sure, the time was set in the dialogue instructions. By the way, the conversation with Mamon is happening at that very apartment already rented for the phone calls by none other but Daria Mastikasheva. The landlady confirmed this, and she let us in. Igor, regarding the phone conversations which you had to exchange with Bonder, I have here a transcript of the scenario. Have a look at this dialogue, please. Does it look familiar to you?
Этих инструкций. Смотри, пожалуйста, не знаком тебе вот, скажем, этот диалог?
Yes, it is identical to what I read. I think absolutely. Why don't you read the ending? Are you sure you read these lines? Yes, 100%. Okay, let's role play it, shall we? Yes.
Окей? Давай тебе позвоню.
Let me call you. Pick up the phone. Hello? Hi, Siri. Hi, how is it going? All well. Everything on film as agreed. The station, the metro. Tomorrow I'll go to Kurchatov. How can people live here in this metropolis? I see. Be careful. Don't roam the streets too much. Understood. Talk to you tomorrow. Till tomorrow, then. Bonder stumbled in his speech. Sometimes he would start with the wrong dialogue. I mean, from the list of the dialogues. He would then read the wrong text, and I was confused how to respond and would give Daria a questioning look. Then I would just hang up, and he would call me back. Daria was sitting here with the same text. Sure, then I was reading from the phone, I mean from her cell phone. Does it mean that you didn't have the instructions with you? She brought it with her every time? Yes. All of them, Mamon, Bonder, and Yurkevich, confirmed that Mastikasheva's role was not limited to this. She was the person who paid the advance sum amounting to $100 per person for the trip. And while Karatai took pictures of their military ideas with the cell phone the day before, Mastikasheva, according to Yurkevich, recorded their departure to Moscow.
А Дарью вообще ты в жизни видел?
Have you ever personally seen Daria? I saw her before the departure. I saw a young woman capturing it on the video. I asked who she was, and Bonder said this is Daria. Daria told him what and where to bring, what to take, and Bonder speaking on her behalf, not on Karatai's. Didn't it seem strange to you? Yes, it did. I asked Bonder why she was taking video of our departure. He said not to worry. It was just for the record that we departed. Everything's okay. It is quite interesting if the third member of the group saw Mastikasheva too. It is no more than 500 yards to the separatists' positions from where we are. And we have a possibility to talk with the third participant in the expedition to Moscow, Sergei Morozov. who returned to the front line after the aborted trip. Sergei, how did you happen to be in Moscow? I was strapped for cash and had to go to the place I didn't want to go to. How much did they offer you for this job? $500 per week. He doesn't take off the balaclava when interviewed. He feels remorse for having been involved in the story and is shy to open his face. How much was the advance? $100. Did you then see Mastikasheva for the first time? Yes, she was sitting in the car with tinted glass windows. I saw her when she rolled down the window a little to say hello to Bondar.
Окно приоткрыла, когда здоровалась с Бондарем.
At that time I didn't see her clearly, and then I saw her once again before we got on a bus to leave for Moscow when she was recording a video with her phone.
Она снимала нас на видео на свой телефон.
Did she give the money to Bondar? Yes, she gave him the money intended for all of us as an advance sum. That is for me and Stas.
Ну, типа как аванс. Ну, как на всех. На меня и на...
You mean $100 to everyone? Yes.
Когда Бондарь
When
предложил
Bondar
Морозову
offered Morozov the job, he demanded advance payment. Then he and Bondar met with Daria, who handed them the money from the car window. Sergei had a better look at her face when she was recording video of their departure at the bus station in Kamenskoye.
Получается, на другой стороне этого вокзала...
The first to appear on the other side of the station was Bondar. And then I saw this woman. She was standing across the street, recording video with her phone. I understood she was filming, not just taking photos, because she was holding the phone in her hand for a long time. And then I got it that she was that very Dasha I saw in the car. I remembered her face partially. Morozov said that at the end of the first day in Moscow, when Bondar got back after a long absence and fell on the bed, throwing a file with some papers on the table, he and Stas picked up the file and found the instructions according to which it appeared: "We are a Ukrainian subversive group that arrived in Moscow to commit acts of terror." The two friends persuaded Bondar to abandon everything and escape. While the going was good, they waited till night, quietly left the apartment, and spent the night at a friend's house in Moscow. At dawn, they picked up a gypsy cab and headed back for Ukraine. Sokolov argues that this is the weakest point in the investigation. As he said in the Moscow interview, it looked like the whole story of the trip of the Ukrainian so-called terrorists to Moscow was a fake from beginning to end, and he had nothing to do with that. This trip of 3 Ukrainian former soldiers to Russia, who thought it up? I think it was concocted by some gifted SBU officers. If they, under Daria's supervision, visit Russia and set up storages of explosives and hideouts, Sergei, who would let them get away? Believe me, FSB are not such suckers to let terrorists get away. They wouldn't care if they blow up something or not. They would just arrest them immediately. You mean to say FSB didn't know of their arrival? FSB would have known if Daria and I were FSB agents. At first sight, it's hard to disagree, indeed. If FSB orchestrated the provocation, how could they lose sight of our heroes, no matter day or night? SBU head Gritsak has a very simple explanation to all of this. It can be aptly described by a Russian word bardak, a mess.
Русским словом бардак.
Okay, I understand. They could have run away in the night, shaking off the chase, like in a movie fashion. But how did they manage to cross the border? Easily, in a taxi. You know, in real life, it's not like in a movie. In real life, it may happen that outside civilians overslept, someone didn't report it, and decided to correct the mistake on his own. And by the time proper commands were given and received, our guys had already reached and crossed the border. You mean to say it was sheer luck? Yes.
Грицак не сомневается в том,
Gritsak has no
что
doubts
реальная
that the
опасность
real danger of terrorist attacks or explosions existed in Moscow and other cities such as Kurchatov, which has the Kursk nuclear power plant, and Tolyaty, where a giant nitrogen plant is located. Both cities were marked in the program of our laborers in Russia. This explains the haste with which that briefing in August was called. Gritsak says the countdown for a possible catastrophe could be a matter of minutes, he says.
возможной катастрофы, говорит он, могло идти на минуты.
It's hard to say when a military invasion could have taken place, but can you imagine, for example, God forbid, an explosion inside a Moscow subway train cabin with 30 dead and say 50 to 70 wounded?
Там 50-70 трехсотых, как мы говорим.
And then they tell the whole world, here is an apartment rented by Ukrainian terrorists, and transcripts of their phone talks and security cams, footage of their taking pictures.
Метро Комсомольская. Вот что нам
What are
делать?
we supposed to do, guys? They would cry. The world says that Russians are terrorists. Ukrainians are terrorists. Here is a whole lot of evidence. For the long history of Putin in power, terrorist attacks have become almost the usual background of Russian life. The most terrible of them were the explosions of apartment houses, 2 in Moscow, 1 each in Buynaksk and Volgodonsk in 1999. Perhaps a 5th explosion was prevented in Ryazan on September 22 by vigilant residents who found suspicious bags in the basement of the house in time. According to the local experts on the scene, the bags were filled with hexagen, the explosive substance used in the previous 4 explosions. Local law enforcement agencies acted efficiently and in a short time detained 2 suspects who turned to be FSB officers. A few hours later on Russian television, it was announced that it was an exercise, there was sugar in the sacks and a dummy fuse in the basement. But it no longer mattered because Russian airplanes were already bombing Chechnya. The war that brought Putin to power began.
Война, которая привела Путина к власти, началась.
Russian aircraft strike only terrorist bases, will pursue them everywhere. Pardon me, if we catch them in the toilet, we'll rub them out in the outhouse. After all, this is it, the matter is closed, for good. Far from everybody brought up the Chechen theory of the bombings. Many journalists and politicians began their own investigations. For some of them, it ended tragically. Well-known journalist Yuri Shekachyhin died suddenly in 2003 from a possible poisoning by an unknown poison. He investigated the explosions. The same year in Moscow, Sergei Yushchenko, a Russian politician and legislator, was assassinated. He conducted his own investigation and, according to some sources, got too close to the solution. A colleague of Shekachyhin, U.S. journalist Paul Khlebnikov, was assassinated in Moscow a year later, in 2004. Needless to say, he also investigated the explosions. In 2002, the book FSB Blows Up Russia was published abroad, written by former FSB officer Alexander Litvinenko and historian Yuri Felshtinsky. Soon, a documentary film was shot after the book. The authors claimed that the houses in Moscow and other cities back in 1999 were blown up by FSB agents with the purpose of bringing Putin to power. According to the British prosecutor's office, Litvinenko was deadly poisoned with radioactive polonium in 2006 in London. Russian special services agents are suspected. Well-known journalist Anna Politkovskaya also investigated those crimes. She was shot point-blank in the elevator of her house in Moscow on Putin's birthday, October the 7th, 2006. The birthday person was among the first to react to Anna's murder in his vintage style.
В своем фирменном стиле.
This assassination by itself does far more damage to the Russian authorities and the Chechen authorities than her publications. As you know, Litvinenko's co-author Yuri Felshtinsky also received death threats. Fortunately, he has been taking precautions and is fine. Yuri has a lot to say about the incident and about Moscow analyst Sergei Sokolov. The historian answered questions via Skype from Boston.
Из Бостона.
First of all, Sergei Sokolov is an FSB officer and a professional provocateur. Berezovsky was surrounded by a number of people assigned to him from FSB. What do you think about this aborted trip to Moscow? What could this lead to? You know, in the worst-case scenario, I mean in terms of loss of human life, a real provocation could have taken place. I mean, a real terrorist act in which some real Russian citizens might have been killed. It would have been, of course, announced that Ukraine sends terrorists to commit acts of terror in Russia. Here is a terrorist attack. Real victims. 3 terrorists arrested. We do not know what kind of a terror act was in the works, whether a small or a big-scale terror act was planned. And depending on the scale of the attack, one could probably judge the readiness of the Russian leadership to use this provocation as an excuse for launching a new military campaign against Ukraine. Mastikasheva doesn't admit her guilt. Darya's only hope is her common-law husband Sokolov. From a distance, he helps her family and also pays for the lawyer's services. If Sokolov ventures to come to Ukraine, he will be arrested right on the border. I wanted, after all, to give her some fairy tale. I wanted her to have a real wedding with a white dress, with a veil, to make her a formal offer, put a ring on her finger. This is not for show, mind you. I wanted her to experience this happiness. I feel bitterness, guilt, horror, for I cannot help my loved one, and it is me who is to blame for all of this. I'd say if he comes, that'll be a deed. If he really wants to save her and give testimony, let him come. We'll gladly accept his testimony. What will happen next, I do not know. Depends on what he has to say. I can say only one thing. In reality, we know a little more than what he thinks. It's true. What's more, I will say that he can take part of her blame. Perhaps he just manipulated her. She didn't know. Maybe she didn't understand what she was doing. Her beloved asked for a favor and she went along. Maybe she didn't fully understand. Let him think about it, really. And honestly, I could never think we would have to fight against Russians. But still there are some rules, not written rules. The goal cannot justify the means. You'll have to answer for all you do. It's hard to disagree. You will be held accountable for everything you do in this life, one way or another, sooner or later. And this is where our story took a U-turn. On January 16 in Moscow, FSB detained Sergei Yuryevich Sokolov. According to press reports, he is charged with illegal possession and carrying of arms. In addition, Russian special services checked his involvement in the staging of a terrorist act. That is, Sokolov, among other things, was arrested on charges similar to those pressed against him by SBU, the staging of a terrorist act. It is quite possible that Sokolov seriously thought about coming to Ukraine, surrendering to the authorities and convincing them that he manipulated Mastikasheva, his lost love, and he says. So it cannot be ruled out that Sokolov was arrested in order to prevent his possible defection. We wanted to clarify the situation, but the phone of the Federal Information Center Analysis and Security is silent. The shop is closed. Who was behind it? The question is rather rhetorical. Do you recall this part of Sokolov's interview? You yourself could have been mopped up too. Did you get a sense it was a very risky affair? Yes, I did, but I was already built into the system. Built into the system, the history of the USSR and Russia is swarming all over the place with tragic and sinister figures built into the system. Tens of thousands of knights of cloak and dagger were all built into the system to be devoured by it sometime later. Is Sokolov one of them, a tiny bolt, a cogwheel of the system? It seems we'll never find out. It's hard to get rid of the feeling that again and again you reread Dostoevsky's novel The Possessed. I wanted, after all, to give her some fairy tale. I wanted her to have a real wedding with a white dress, with a veil, put a ring on her finger. If Sokolov loved Daria as much as he claims, why did he give her to the slaughter? Or are these the rules of the war, where everything, even love, is put into action?
Ой, чий то кінь стоїть, що сива гривонька сподобалась мені, сподобалась мені. Та я дівчинонька, сподобалась мені, ой, сподобалась мені. Та я дівчинонька, не так та дівчина, як біле личенько. Подай же, дівчино, подай же гарная, на коня рук. Дівчинко, подай же, дівчино, ай, подай же гарная,